Hi John, thank you so much for inviting us today. Here we are at the Grand Lodge of England, yes?
That's right.
We've come today for you to talk to us today all about Freemasons. Yes. Now, many people see the secrecy around Freemasons, but you say in your words, it's not a secret society, it's a society with some secrets. Is that how you would put it?
I'm not quite sure that that's how we would put it today. Certainly not a secret society.
Okay.
There are certain aspects, particularly in the ritual, which we would regard as private rather than secret, although in the language of the ritual they're described as the secrets of Masonry. But in fact, we have been for a very long time a very open organisation. This building we're in is open to the public. People can come in. We do tours of the building. We have a wonderful library and museum, which the public can come in, consult the books, bring stuff in for identification and advice, ask questions, do any sort of research from family history to research into Freemasonry itself.
That's right. I mean, you can actually go onto the website and you just type in Freemasons and the Grand Lodge of England, and up it'll pop with all this information. So people have this misconception about it being a secret society, but really you are quite open. As you say, people can come here on tours. Obviously there's areas and sections, like many buildings, that would not be open to the public, but generally as far as you can do, you have quite an open policy on what you give out information-wise.
We certainly do, and that in a sense is because for a period we were regarded as being over-secretive, overprotective of our privacy, and that came about largely because of events in the late 1930s and the Second World War. Before that we were very public. It was an era when, particularly the 18th, 19th, early 20th century, where people went in for public processions for all sorts of national or local celebrations, and as well as the local civic dignitaries and the church leaders and the local town band, the Freemasons in their regalia would be part of it. We used to do foundation stone layings of building with everybody there, that sort of thing. We ran 2 weekly newspapers and a magazine, which you would buy at the W.H. Smith or on the station newsstands, that sort of thing. Then towards the end of the 1930s, because of what was happening in Russia, Spain, Germany, Italy with the fascists and the communists, who for I think obvious reasons, but the public might not see it as being so obvious, didn't like Freemasonry because we stand for tolerance and freedom of thought and helping others. took against Freemasonry, and in those countries it became a very dangerous thing to be a Freemason. Freemasonry was banned. In Mussolini's Italy, a lot of people went to prison. Franco's Spain, a lot of Freemasons were rounded up, and quite a number of them died in prisons. And then when the Nazis took power in Germany, first thing they did was to close down Freemasonry. And an awful lot of Freemasons, not just in Germany, but when war broke out and the Nazis moved into occupying most of Europe, as well as seizing Jews and Jewish property, they would round up the local Freemasons, take stuff from the local Masonic halls back to Berlin, and built up a network. And a lot of people went into labour and concentration camps simply because they were Freemasons. Local example of that was, of course, the Channel Islands were occupied. And shortly after the occupation, two beautiful Victorian Masonic halls, one in Jersey, one in Guernsey, all the contents of those were seized, shipped off to Berlin, and were put on public display in Berlin at the height of the war.
Where are they now? Are they still there?
They disappeared, unfortunately. At the end of the war, a lot of stuff went to East Germany and Russia after the war, and a lot of the stuff that went to Russia, mainly documents and lodge minute books and books and things like that. Most of the artifacts and regalia and stuff was never seen again.
That's very sad. Now you say during the Second World War, I mean we're rushing on here actually, but during the Second World War that a lot of Freemasons were locked up because I think it was in your quotes, freedom of thought and freedom of speech, which is very much a plateau that I like to think that we still have today, that we can still speak our mind in the freedom of things that we believe, which is wrong. So this is really what the Freemasons is all about, is freedom of speech, freedom of thought.
That comes into it.
That's
part of it. We have what we call three great principles, which in the language of the ritual are brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Yes.
Brotherly love is fraternity, sociability, tolerance, the idea that people have the right to have their own opinions. You might not agree with them, you might heartily disagree with them, but they have a right.
But they have a right to that opinion. Yes,
and you have the right to have your opinions,
yes,
and your freedoms. Relief is charity in all its forms, not just collecting and giving out money, but giving service to the community, helping those who are less advantaged. And one of the misunderstandings about Masonic charity is it's not simply inward looking.
No, I know, because the Masons have actually helped out a friend of mine, which was nothing to do with the Masons, so I know that they do this.
And truth is high standards, old-fashioned word morality, striving to do the best you can to be deal with people honestly in everything you do, your private and your public and your work life.
If we can just talk about the lodges and how many there are and how big Freemasonry is, how many groups and how far it goes around the world. And when we've talked about that, if we can go right back to the beginning of where Freemasonry started.
Freemasonry is spread around the globe. It started off somewhere in the British Isles. For historical reasons, there are separate Grand Lodges in England, Scotland and Ireland. The Grand Lodge of Ireland, despite the political divide, covers the north and the south. And it spread out from this country in the 18th century, taken by travelling lodges in regiments in the army, by people who went out, like the East India Company, merchants, settlers who were going out. And the development of Freemasonry overseas mirrors the development of the British Empire in the 18th and 19th, early 20th century. It's now basically every democratic country has its own Grand Lodge, which is the governing body. In some areas they call it a Grand Orient. So we have three, England, Ireland, Scotland here. Most of the European countries, United States of America, because of the way it developed, there's a Grand Lodge in each state. There are probably something like 5 million Freemasons worldwide. International in the sense...
5 million?
5 million.
5 million.
international in the sense that it is spread around the world, but each Grand Lodge is independent. There isn't a sort of world governing body.
Is there different rules and regulations and rituals in different lodges, or are they all very similar?
Similar basis, they have what we call the same basic principles.
Okay.
But as Freemasonry spread out and was taken up in various parts of the world, local traditions, local culture obviously affected. So if I was to go to a lodge, say, in Germany or France or Italy, I would recognise the basics, but there might be differences of detail in the way the ceremonies were carried out. Same basic principles and the same ideas.
Now, you have ways to recognise a Freemason. Obviously, I won't ask you how to divulge those, because everything has their own little traits. So everybody knows, even if they're from a different country, how to recognise a Freemason.
Yeah, we have what we call the traditional modes of recognition, the handshake and signs and passwords, which we don't use indiscriminately. They're used in a Masonic context. It's a way of proving that you are. If I was to go to the USA and I had a spare evening and I wanted to experience American Masonry, I would turn up where the local lodge was. They obviously wouldn't know me from Adam. I might have my Grand Lodge certificate saying I'd been made a Mason here, but I would expect to be tested, and they would run me through the handshakes and the passwords and the signs of these as a test of membership. We are very careful to impress on members that they shouldn't do that indiscriminately. And you hear all sorts of stories about people saying, that people made a Masonic sign of me. If they did that, they would have problems with us, because that would be misusing their membership. And I have to say, in nearly 40 years I've been a Freemason, I can think of only a couple of occasions where I've been at something non-Masonic, where I've detected somebody trying to give me a Masonic handshake. And I've been very wary of that person after that, because they are knowingly not standing up to the rules.
Exactly. Now, what about people who want to join Freemasonry? There must be tests or kind of guidelines that you have where you turn some people down.
It can happen. Like all membership associations, you are proposed by two members who know you into a lodge. You join the lodge. In a lot of cases, mine, for example, it was a family thing. So one of my father and one of my uncles proposed me into the lodge that they were a member of. Other people come in through friends or work colleagues. But you quite often get people now, they see the website, they get in touch here, they say, I'm interested, I don't think I know any Freemasons, and we will introduce them to Freemasons in their local area and go from there. Prime qualification for admission into Freemasonry is you must have a belief in God.
Right. I was going to ask about the religion side of it, yes.
How you express that, what your religion is entirely a matter for you. But you must have that basic
That's
belief.
The primary.
That's the thing which links us all, is that we all, whether we're Christian of whatever denomination, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, Parsi, we all have, and that's a rule that we call a landmark.
Do you call that the divine creator or the great architect?
We have a number of expressions like the great architect, which enables people to refer to God without giving offence to anybody who's there. That gets misunderstood in that you often hear people say, the Masons have their own God. No, the great architect to me is the God I worship.
The supreme.
To a Jew, it is God.
Who they
a Freemason,
worship,
it would be to they worship. It's not a combining. It's not a separate Masonic God. So you have to have a basic.
So you wouldn't have an atheist.
No.
Basically, yeah.
That's it. Not an atheist. Apart from that, and because one of our great principles is truth, morality, high standards, someone with a criminal record, it would be unlikely that they would come in. But when somebody's proposed, they're interviewed by a committee of the lodge, and they would ask them all sorts of questions about themselves, what they think Freemasonry is and how they would go on. And that is done because people do misunderstand Freemasonry. And you get people who, when they've gone through the interview, said, "Oh, well, it's not for me," because they thought, as we've been accused in the past, that Freemasonry is a network and it will get you on in life, it will get you on in business. And one of the things that is made very plain with people from the first contact onwards is that that's a no-no. If you use it for your own or anybody else's advantage, that's breaking our rules, and you're out. But apart from that, there are no special qualifications. We believe Freemasonry is there to bring people together who, in, again, nice 18th century language, would otherwise stand at a perpetual distance. We're interested, we know what divides people, which is why the two subjects we don't talk about in a Masonic meeting are politics and religion.
Right, yeah. Well, that'll kick up a storm anyway, won't it? Politics and religion.
Yeah. But we want to know how people can get on together, how they can get over those difficulties of politics and religion, so you don't discuss
Well,
them
something must be working, because you have members all over the world and thousands, well, 5 million of them actually, so you must be doing something right.
I think we are in a way, and it's one of the things that we're sort of quietly proud of, that there's been a lot of talk recently with the bicentenary of the abolition of slavery, and we've had a proud record for nearly 300 years now of ignoring the things that have divided people in the past and bringing them together, regardless of what might be happening outside. And in the 18th century in England, still a huge amount of anti-Semitism. Jews were welcomed into Freemasonry. When Freemasonry was taken to places like India, no problem with Indians joining the lodges, that sort of thing. And we've gone that direction, promoting tolerance, trying to bring people together to find out what they've got in common so they can build on that for the good of the community as a whole.
Now, I noticed on your website, I had a look at the people who had been Masons in the past and currently, and there's people from all different walks of life. You know, there's sportsmen and there's poets, there's entertainers, and I noticed Peter Sellers was one of them, and Rudyard Kipling. There's quite a few, so it is interesting that it attracts people from every angle of life.
It does, and again, this is the bringing people together.
Yes.
We say once you're within Freemasonry and the context of a lodge meeting, everybody's equal. The differences of social standing and everything disappear, and everybody's equal and has an equal opportunity of serving in the lodge. So having worked when I was running Library and Museum here with our membership registers for a long period, we were always had a representation of the whole of society in our lodges, and everything from ordinary working people up to members of the aristocracy, members of the royal family, of course.
Now, it's interesting because obviously we're talking about these members who have been members over the decade, well, centuries really. What about women members?
Women can be Freemasons. Not under the United Grand Lodge of England. We've continued the tradition when we were formed back in 1717, when Freemasonry was originating, because the position of women was different in society. They didn't join clubs and associations. We preserved that tradition. But for over 100 years, there has been a system whereby there are female lodges. And in fact, the Order of Women Freemasons celebrated their centenary last year with a huge meeting at Royal Albert Hall last June. And they equally are a women-only organisation. We meet at a senior level because anything going on affects us, and we talk about that. But we don't visit each other's lodges, and we don't mix in that way. But we have a huge amount of respect for what they do. And so if a woman wants to be a Freemason, there is the opportunity of doing it. To
come in there. So that's gone for 1 century, basically. Yes. Whose idea was that to bring them in?
It came from France. In the late 19th century, the Grand Lodge of France, which was the main Grand Lodge in France at that stage, started what they called lodges of adoption, in which they, to bring the ladies in. That became a body called co-masonry, which was mixed men and women. They introduced a lodge into London in 1904, and then around about 1910, 1911, the women decided that they wanted to work on their own without the male members, and have continued doing so ever since. And they work very much in the way that we do.
The same
basic principles, same ceremonies, regalia, do a tremendous amount of charity on a local basis.
Great stuff. Right, now you're going to take us on a tour, aren't you,
Yes.
of this fantastic building, and the architecture around here is absolutely amazing, because it's Freemasonry. So I guess a lot of work and time has gone into building this place. But just before we leave this fantastic room, if you can just tell us about this chap here in the painting.
As I said, we've had a close connection with the royal family for 250 years. This is the George, Prince of Wales, probably best remembered as the Prince Regent, and then King George IV. And he was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England as Prince of Wales from 1791 to 1830.
You've brought us to this fantastic room, and the architecture in here is just amazing. But the room itself actually holds the memorial to the soldiers who died, I believe, in the First World War. And this is the casket. If you could tell us about this.
This is the memorial casket, and it's got a roll in it which can be turned, which lists the nearly 3,000 English Freemasons who were killed on active service.
English Freemasons, okay.
Killed on active service in the First World War. But in fact, the whole building is the memorial. Grand Lodge has been in Great Queen Street since 1775, and this is the third building. And at the end of the First World War, they wanted to find a way of commemorating all those, not just English Freemasons, but all Freemasons who had given their lives in the First World War. And we needed a new headquarters, so they decided to rebuild Freemasons Hall as a memorial to those who had given their lives. But they didn't want to call it a war memorial, so it was called the Masonic Peace Memorial. And the whole building was known as that until peace ceased at the outbreak of the Second World War, and we went back to calling it Freemasons Hall. But you're quite right, it's probably the least known gem of Art Deco architecture in certainly London, and probably the whole of the country.
When I first came here on one of the tours a few years ago, and I walked into this room, and it just absolutely took my breath away, because myself as an artist, I can appreciate how much work has actually gone into this, and you can see by the ceilings, which we'll show on camera in a while. But it's absolutely amazing. So a lot of time and dedication has gone into that.
They were determined as a memorial it was going to be the best. And despite all the economic problems in the 1920s and early 30s, when the building was being built, they raised £1.3 million voluntary subscriptions from the membership, and were determined that the design was going to be the best, and all the materials that were used, which we're now a Grade 2 star listed building inside and out, which is quite a headache to look after these days.
I can imagine, actually, because there's always kind of rules and regulations when it's listed, and you can't do this without the permission, and lots of red tape going on behind it. But you can see a lot of people have put the time and dedication into it, which is, it's absolutely fantastic. If you can just tell us a little bit about the stained glass windows, because they're on three sides here. If we can talk about this one first.
The memorial window, of course, shows the Angel of Peace, the dates of the First World War. The angel is carrying a model of the what is actually the tower of this building, which probably people recognise because it doubles as the headquarters of MI5, the BBC spoof series.
We've seen that, yes.
And round it, you have representatives of the various services that were involved in the war, and various stonemasons, and of course references back to King Solomon, because the rituals of the lodge are based on the building of King Solomon's temple.
Well, that is actually something I really wanted to ask you about. How far does it go back? Because we know that it is connected with the temple of King Solomon. And is it that the architecture is built around the King Solomon's structure? Not itself, of course, because that's in Jerusalem, we believe.
Architecture, very important. As the Americans would say, the $64,000 question is, where did we start, and why and when?
Yes.
And there's a huge amount of scholarly discussion gone on for over 100 years without really coming up with the answer. We believe we started sometime in the late 1500s, early 1600s, and that was a period when politics and religion dominated everybody's lives. And
what they don't today, then?
Not quite in the same way. And it was down to things like, after the founding of the Church of England and things like that, there was a political view which went with your religious view. And of course it led to civil war in this country in the 1630s. And people often forget that the Civil War wasn't just about politics, it was also a religious war. And we think that those who originated Freemasonry, they were trying to find a way of bridging that gap. They knew what divided people. They were far more interested in finding out how they could bring people together, forget the differences of politics and religion, and see what they had in common and how they could build on that for the good of the community.
Amazing. We can just talk about the casket itself.
The casket itself is a certain amount of Egyptian influence in the design of the building, and it's based apparently on the architect's idea of something that would have floated down the Nile to carry the memory, and it has decorations on the top. You've got representatives of the 4 services that were involved.
Yes, I was just looking at those actually.
And on the front you've got various St. George of England, King Solomon, Moses, who of course, the basis of Christian morality is the 10 Commandments, but those commandments seem to be the basis of morality in all religions. So Moses is depicted there with the tablets. And like everything in Freemasonry, everything has a symbolism.
Could you just explain the 4 services they involved?
The 4 services were the Army, the Navy, the Royal Flying Corps as it was there, and of course the Merchant Navy Service, who were very important bringing stuff in to keep things going.
Now I've noticed on the leaflets for the Freemasons, there is angels. There's like a symbol, but there's like angels with wings. Can you explain that? Is it angels?
It's. I'm not sure they're angels in that sense. They. You quite often find on all sorts of either Masonic things or things where you've got Masonic decoration. You'll find sun and the moon, and normally 7. They look a little bit like Renaissance cherubs with flying wings, and that's just representative of the heavens and eternity.
Now we've come to the entrance of the Grand Temple, but before we do take the journey through the doors, if we can just have a look around this room and you can just explain the designs in the floor and the ceiling, and especially the history behind this magnificent door itself and what it's made of.
Yeah. The floor reflects the ceiling, and it's a multifaceted star, which takes us back again to the idea of eternity and the afterlife. There's a little joke when we bring visitors around. The centre is lapis lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone.
I know, it's one of my favourites actually.
And the guides usually warn that anybody seen getting a penknife out of their pocket will be escorted from the building.
It's quite rare these days actually.
It is, very rare. And ceiling is probably one of the most magnificent painted ceilings of its period. And again, as with Art Deco, lot of geometric patterns, which ties in with Freemasonry, architecture being based on geometry, squares, levels.
That's right, there's this set, square and compass.
The square and compasses, yes, they're the most common emblem for Freemasonry. Square is morality, and the compasses remind you to keep within due bounds within the circle of things. But the doors are probably the thing that most people remark on. They were quite an engineering feat in their day. They were the largest single castings when they were cast in South London in 1931.
That's amazing.
And each door is 1.25 tons of solid bronze.
Who carried it? Or how did they carry
quite
it?
a few people. Probably a crane job. But
probably before they put the roof on, I guess.
But they, again, full of symbolism and tell a story. To become what we call a Master Mason, you go through 3 ceremonies, which are, because we're talking about building and bringing people together. When the ritual was being originated in the 16 and early 1700s, the main source book for allegory was the Bible. And the only building that's described in any detail in the Bible, and it's done twice, is King Solomon's temple, which was also seen as the ideal of the perfect temple, both an actual temple and the temple that we all try to build within ourselves. So on the doors you've got the preparation of the stone and the metalwork, the bringing of timber from Tyre, the making of the timber for the temple, weaving the veils of the temple, bringing in incense and precious metals, and then right at the top you've got the dedication procession through Jerusalem once the temple was finished, bringing in the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and the other furnishings for the temple.
And you've got the pillars with the
Pillars,
wheat? Yeah?
yes.
Wheat? It is wheat?
It is wheat, sign of plenty and abundance. The two pillars, which were said to have stood at the entrance of Solomon's temple, and on the top they have, although they're a little bit indistinct, globes. One terrestrial, one celestial, pointing out that Freemasonry is universal.
Right.
And in the centre, a Hebrew symbol for God.
Which is the circle with the
The
triangle?
circle, the triangle.
Okay. And what's the wave in the middle?
That's the Hebrew symbol standing for God.
Now, a lot of people associate the pyramid, so I take it, is this to do with the pyramid? With
No,
the Freemasons?
Pyramid came into Masonic iconography in the late 1700s. In the 1790s, Napoleon went on an expedition to Egypt. Took a lot of archaeologists, historians and artists with him, and it had a huge influence on art and design throughout Europe when the discoveries that they made. And it also came into Masonic iconography because in those days wisdom and learning was supposed to be from the East. Well, today we would regard what we call the Far East as being the East, but in the 18th century, late 1700s, the East was of course the Gulf area now, Egypt and what are now Iraq, Iran and Syria and places like that. So the pyramid was seen again as a sign of wisdom.
Was Napoleon a Freemason?
There's a huge amount of argument, no documentary evidence that he was. He certainly used, or we would say misused, Freemasonry. It was closed down after the French Revolution for a while, and then Napoleon allowed the Grand Orient to start meeting again, but to control it he put his brothers and a lot of his marshals into the senior positions in it, and was using it politically for a while, and then they went off.
Do you know
on their own.
anything about Napoleon's experience when he went into one of the, I think it was one of the Great Pyramids of Giza? He had an experience. Do you know anything about that?
No, hasn't come across my radar.
Okay, I just wondered. So we see the pyramid symbol here, and as I say, people associate the pyramid symbol with the Freemasons, which you say it has come into the architecture. So can you explain the pyramid which is on the American dollar, which a lot of people associate that, and then there's the gap at the top? Do you understand what that means? Is that part of Freemasonry?
No,
It's not.
and
Okay.
what people
I just
forget-
wanted to try
yes,
to clear this up.
because there are a lot of conspiracy theories about Freemasonry and the founding of America and things, simply because a number of the founding fathers, including George Washington, were Freemasons. Benjamin Franklin and people like that. But the dollar bill, of course, didn't come in to being until about the 1850s, 1860s, which was a long time after. And it is actually part of one of the American seals. And again, it's the pyramid being a symbol of learning, of education. And then on the top of it, the all-seeing eye of God, which has been, you find it in Masonic symbolism, but it has also been a general symbol for God
For a long
almost
time.
as long as man's existed.
But, so there's no connection
No
as
connection
such?
as such.
Okay, just wanted to clear that up. Right, if that's okay with you, then we'll take a journey through the doors. Okay. Now, John, we're in the Grand Temple. So if you can explain, if you'd like to, what actually takes place in here.
This is where Grand Lodge meets. Grand Lodge is the governing body of English Freemasonry. It's a representative body of all the members, and like all organisations, we have a rule book and financial affairs to run, and that's all done in Grand Lodge, which meets 4 times a year.
Okay.
But it's also used for other major Masonic meetings when we have a large number of people, because the room will seat up to 1,700 people. But increasingly in the last 10 years, we've been using it for other purposes. We have films, people coming in. A lot of people will know the outside of the building from the BBC series Spooks.
Oh, yes.
We've had the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, part of that was filmed in here. We've recently had Matt Damon in filming a new film about the Iraq War, and Guy Ritchie doing part of his new film about Sherlock Holmes. Fashion shows, concerts, all sorts of receptions and presentations.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's very much a working building,
It
not
sounds
just
like
for
it.
Freemasonry, and it gives the lie a little to this whole idea of Freemasonry being very secretive.
Well, exactly. So everybody's saying, well, Freemasons, that's secret society. Well, it doesn't sound that secret if you have people coming in doing fashion shows and filming, because I believe you had Sharon Stone here.
We've had Sharon Stone, Matt Damon, Rowan Atkinson when he did his Johnny English film, all sorts of people like that.
So, as you say, it is a working building, so it does dispel the myth of it being as secret as people think. Now, we're sitting on this carpet. If you could just explain a little bit about the symbolism behind the black and white checky carpet.
It has, there for 2 reasons. One is the link back to King Solomon's Temple again, where the flooring of the temple and the Holy of Holies was said to be black and white squares, but it's also got a symbolic meaning. It represents the light and shade of life, the good and the bad that you're likely to come up against through your passage through life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, all around this room, there, especially the ceiling, we'll have to take some shots so we can look up to that. But there's so many different things within the mosaics. We have I believe that's George and the Dragon.
St George and the Dragon representing England, because we're the United Grand Lodge of England. And on the other side you've got Helios, the sun, in his chariot, taking the sun from the east to the west, representing the day. At the west end you've got Euclid and Pythagoras, who were the basis of geometry, the basis of architecture. And above the main throne, you've got King Solomon himself, Hiram, King of Tyre, who provided a lot of the material, and the ladder with representations of faith, hope, and charity, leading you up to God himself. Mm-hmm. In the corners, you've got the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, which are how we expect our people to operate, with prudence, temperance, and fortitude and justice.
So when was this room built?
This was built, the whole building was built between 1927 and it was officially opened in 1933.
Is that how long it actually took to
It took
to
5
finish
years
this?
to do it. It's not exactly a small building, it's 2.25 acres, the main site, and about 11.5 acres of floors on the various floors.
Because looking up at the ceiling, you would think it was a painting, but it's not. These are...
No, it's a mosaic.
Individual
They brought
mosaic.
a group of mosaic artists over from North Italy, where they're famous for it, and they spent about 7 months on scaffolding up there doing it all.
It's like the Sistine Chapel in a sense, isn't it? So they must have all been lying on their backs looking up. If you can just explain the star at the top.
The ceiling is the sky, the canopy of heaven, which covers over everything, and the star is one of the major stars. It's a bit of an engineering feat in itself. It comes down on a hydraulic pulley and covers the whole of the centre of the floor when it comes down. It's huge, because it's about 60 feet up there.
So it comes down. Why does it come down?
I've changed the light bulbs.
That's simple.
Simple as that. You've got to change the light bulbs and it gets cleaned every so often.
I guess so. And in each corner are there shields?
Yes, they are the arms of Grand Lodge, which were adopted in the 18th century. We were given a grant of arms by the College of Heralds in 1919. And you get them in the ceiling and over the four corner doors.
It's absolutely amazing. Now, what am I missing? There's a great big organ up here.
A wonderful organ designed by Henry Willis for the building, a superb instrument. And the room can quite happily vibrate if the grand organist lets it quiet.
And everyone's singing in a good tune, you might say. And again, we have stained glass windows. Is there any symbolism behind those?
That's light. Mm-hmm. The rays of light coming down. And then, of course, you have, rather like the old guilds and livery companies, a lodge and Grand Lodge. They're ruled by a master and two wardens, or in Grand Lodge, Grand Master and Grand Warden. So you have the Grand Master's chair, and he's supported by a deputy and an assistant, and the senior and junior Grand Wardens in the west and south of the room. So
how often do the Grand Masters meet with ceremony on the big occasions?
The big occasions. Grand Lodge meets 4 times a year to carry out any changes and policy decisions. And then at the end of April we have the annual investiture, when the Grand Master appoints his Grand Officers, national officers, to help him during the next year carry out things all around the country. It's also used by, outside London, lodges are grouped in provinces, which are based roughly on the old counties, and the home counties provinces hold their annual meeting here. Any sort of major Masonic celebrations we would do in here. We recently consecrated a new lodge to meet in London, and there were about 750 people wanted to attend, so the constitution ceremony for that new lodge took place in this room.
So how many people can be seated in here at one time?
I think the fire officer allows us 1,700.
Okay, that's quite a lot then. So I guess when people come here and they're all dressed up in their regalia, for want of better words, I bet it's quite spectacular.
It's a fantastic sight. It's a typical example of good British pageantry.
I was going to say, all chaps together.
Yes.
And ladies?
On occasions, we've had ladies who've come to address Grand Lodge. Of course, non-Masonic events that take place, very much a mixed audience. But on particularly something like the annual investiture in April, it's still, after 30 years of attending it, when you see it and you come in and everybody's sitting in their dark blue collars of office and apron. The Grand Officers of the year wear their chains of office, and we have a group called Grand Stewards who do the arrangements for the banquet after the meeting, and they wear scarlet, and it's very colourful and typical sort of English pageantry.
Must be a wonderful feeling of camaraderie, I guess.
There is, and I think that's one of the strengths. People quite often say, "No, how has Freemasonry gone on for so long?" And how has United Grand Lodge of England, we've got about 255,000 members in England and Wales, and that is very much part of it. It's we seem to live in a very isolationist world these days, and all sorts of old associations are having problems and disappearing. But Freemasonry provides this sort of camaraderie and a bonding through the ceremonies, and I think that's one of its strengths these days.
Well, I was going to say, do you think Freemasonry today is going from strength to strength, or is it keeping on what you would call an even plateau?
We like most voluntary organisation membership organisations, we went through a pretty tough period in the late 70s, 80s and 90s, when the country as a whole had a lot of economic problems, things like that. There was also a generation which weren't joiners of things. But we seem to have come through that, and certainly the last 2 or 3 years we seem to have bottomed out on the membership, and in a number of areas, surprisingly the rural areas rather than cities and metropolitan areas, it's on the rise again.
That's really interesting, actually.
Well, I think it's we went through a period where things like church organisations, Rotary, Roundtable, things like that, they'd been going through the same sort of problems, and in a lot of areas have disappeared, whereas Freemasonry didn't have such a great effect, and people are seeing it, particularly now that we've gone back to the business of being much more in the public view, and they see it as an organisation which does good in the community, and for a lot of people it provides them a social life.
Exactly, yes, because I suppose there's always functions going on to attend to. Now the Freemasons, they do a lot of work for charities, but from what I've read from my studies, once upon a time there were hard and fast rules, and if a Freemason broke them, there was some kind of, I don't know if punishment is the right word, but they were brought back into line. But I think you've mellowed a little bit on your rules.
We're very strict on people breaking the law or breaking our rules and principles. I mean, anybody misusing a membership, anybody who, if you're convicted of a criminal offence, then once the law has dealt with you and that person has gone through, you will come up into Masonic discipline procedures, and if you've had a custodial sentence, that's it, your membership is ended. And
there's no exceptions?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. And it goes back to the whole business of the basis in morality and high standards. And if you can't keep those high standards, then you can't be a member of the club, as it were.
Now, you've been a Freemason member for quite some time.
Coming up for 39 years.
Wow. That's quite some time, so you must enjoy it here.
I do, and it's one of the things which in the last few years, journalists sort of say, well, you know, if it's the same ceremonies, if you don't get anything out of it in a material sense, to which I would say, well, why do you have to get a material benefit out of something? He said, you know, why did I say, because we enjoy it.
Exactly.
It is the same basic ceremony each time, but you've got a different group of people doing it, you've got a new member going through it. That makes a difference. And I've been incredibly lucky working at the centre. I've been to all sorts of places, met all sorts of people that I couldn't imagine I would have done in any other sort of walk of life. And the fascinating thing about it is I've done quite a bit of travelling, speaking about Freemasonry abroad, and I think what encapsulates it is that I can fly somewhere, be met at an airport by whoever's going to look after me to whichever Masonic group I'm going to. I'm usually being put up in a hotel, but instead of being taken straight to the hotel, I'll be taken to somebody's home for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something.
Yes.
And I can think of very few organisations where there's that sort of level of trust between people who haven't met. I mean, we'd always spoke to each other on the phone, we'd emailed each other to set things up, but we'd never actually met. But there is that sort of level of trust between that you're very happy to invite them into your home.
Now, before someone becomes a Freemason, as we discussed earlier, they go through a vetting procedure. What if someone wants to come out of Freemasonry? What happens in that sense? Are they just free to leave?
Quite easy,
or how do they not become a Freemason?
It's quite simple. If for whatever reason, Freemasonry is not to everybody's taste. There are those who don't enjoy it, and they just simply write to their lodge and say, sorry, not for me. Occasionally, if somebody falls on hard times, they'll resign from their lodge. And you just simply write to your lodge secretary and say, sorry, as of this date, I'm resigning from the lodge. If, for whatever reason, you want to completely sever your relationship with Freemasonry, you simply write into the Grand Secretary, our Chief Executive, and there's a form you fill out which says you no longer wish to be considered to be a Freemason.
Do you find that many people want to leave, or is just the odd few?
It's the odd few, and quite often it's because their proposer and seconder haven't talked to them enough about it to find out, and they've either joined for the wrong reasons, or literally, it happened to one of my cousins. He joined because it was a family thing, and his father and his brothers were involved, and he decided it wasn't for him.
So maybe sometime along the line, not with everybody, but there's a little bit of peer pressure, and then they find it's just not their cup of tea.
Oh, that's something which I one over a few times over the years. I've had friends who've got over enthusiastic about their Freemason. They've been trying to put it, and I said, no, you don't push. You just let them make their own mind up.
Absolutely.
Because they should come in of their own wish, not to please somebody else.
Try before you buy. Exactly. What is the age range of a person who can join to become a Freemason?
Traditionally, 21 is the youngest, but you can, by what we call dispensation, be initiated under 21, and that's happening a lot at the moment. We've got a series of lodges which are attached to universities around the country. I mean, the two eldest are at Oxford and Cambridge, and they, obviously, undergraduates are under 21, so they can initiate people who are under 21 and get them through the process whilst they're still at the university. But the age range is anything from 18 until, actually, I think probably the oldest died in the last couple of days.
Right, I think we're going to go on and we're going to look at some other rooms, which would be fantastic. So let's go on our journey.
Fine.
Thank you. We've come to the Indian temple, or is it the Egyptian temple?
Officially, it's rather banally called Lodge Room Number 10, but because of the architecture, I think particularly the dome, there's been a tradition of calling it the Indian temple, which I've always found very strange because the decoration is much more Egyptian.
Well, I would have thought that myself, actually, looking around at the stripes and the colours. It really is the golds and the blues.
It is, and the columns particularly look very much like when you see the Egyptian temples. It is very much that style of thing, but there was a suggestion when the building was being planned that if lodges in a particular area contributed to the thing, that rooms would be named after them. And only 3 areas did. Buckinghamshire here, and at that stage in the 1920s and 30s, we had lodges out in Japan and Burma. And the lodges in Japan and Burma contributed the maximum, so there are 2 rooms on, which are rather plain, on the floor above this, which were known as the Japan and the Burma rooms. So everybody used to insist, no, this is Lodge Room Number 10, but you can't stop people doing it, and most people say, oh, the Indian temple. Yes,
so it's not just that people who are Indian will come into this temple, it's a real mixture, but it's just dedicated.
It's just people think, oh, this looks Indian, it's the Indian room.
Yes. If you can explain about the temples, the pillars.
Yeah, the pillars come in 2 ways in Freemasonry. You have the 2 pillars, which the ones at either end and here, which are, there were supposedly 2 pillars outside the entrance to King Solomon's temple. Then you've got 3 others, which are of the Doric, Corinthian and Ionic orders of architecture, which you find at the master and the warden's pedestals. They represent wisdom, strength and beauty. Wisdom, King Solomon.
Yes.
Strength, King Hiram, who produced the material for the building of the temple. And beauty, Hiram Abiff, who was the third of the legendary original Grand Masters, because he was the architect and the designer. But it also represents the wisdom and strength and beauty that you find through life.
It is absolutely a remarkable building. I mean, in the centre of London, people wouldn't even know this really existed till they came inside.
No, when I first started working here in the early 1970s, there were 1 or 2 of my friends from university and people from where I worked in the northeast before who came down to London, and they'd say, well, we've been through Covent Garden area before, and of course we've seen this, but we just assumed it was a government building or something like that, because it is rather stark on the outside.
And now they think it's the Spooks building.
Now they think it's the Spooks building, and it goes back to secrecy again. One of the things that really tickled me recently was a friend of mine said to me, had I seen the MI5 website? I was like, didn't know where MI5 had a website.
There's an MI5?
There is an MI5 website. And I said, no. He said, oh, you're mentioned on it. and they've got a picture of the tower entrance, which is supposed to be the MI5 entrance in Spooks.
Okay.
And there's a little bit under the front saying, this is not Thames House, this is the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden. Thames House is not open to the public, the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden is.
But this isn't Covent Garden, is it?
We're just on the edge.
Oh, we're just on the edge,
Yeah.
right. Okay, because I think of the markets when I think
Yes.
of Covent Garden,
No.
so we are literally on the edge of it. Now this is dissected, well, really into three. There's no pillars over here. Why is that?
Just the architect's fancy.
Because normally everything is north, south, east, west.
Yes, in the tradition of all sorts of temples, they were usually on an east-west axis. So figuratively, where the masters sit is in the east, and that goes back to the business of knowledge and learning was supposed to have originally come from the east.
Oh, right, okay.
So that the senior warden's in the west, the junior warden in the south. And that's the standard configuration wherever you go around this country. Although the architecture might be different, the lodge room will be set up in the same way, with the master and the wardens in those positions. In London, the secretary and the treasurer tend to sit at the desk. In other places, they might be in different areas. But same basic layout wherever you go.
Well, you say knowledge originally comes from the east. Which part in particular?
It's a sort of very general east, that there was this idea in the late 1600s, the 1700s, when they were beginning to physically discover more of the world, let alone start thinking about ideas. And that there was this idea because classical times, Greece, and the Greek philosophers.
As we've seen, Pythagoras.
Exactly,
and the other
Pythagoras
one,
and
yes.
Euclid. Then before that, it was supposed to be in Egypt, and where all the learning was, and where the original mystery religions were. And of course, they didn't know much beyond that. They knew there was stuff beyond that, but they didn't know. So, for the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, the East was that area of the sort of Western Mediterranean,
Right.
Down to the Gulf area, and that was where knowledge and learning was supposed to have started and developed.
In your opinion, where do you think really the first knowledge came from of esoteric subjects?
I think it's been with us since man started to communicate. Men started to communicate with each other. So mankind started to communicate with each other.
As in cavemen? But
Probably
where did we make that leap? Because we have ancient Egypt with the fantastic architecture of the pyramids, and then it didn't really seem to further on from that, and it's kind of stopped, and then we went a bit primitive. So how did it all kick off again?
I think it goes through that way, and you get parallel things happening in South America with the Maya and the Aztecs.
Oh, okay.
Examples of stuff that they're finding now in Australasia, stuff that they're finding now in China, where and you're right, there is this sort of curious thing that you get a civilization and a particular way of thinking and particular ideas, and then they seem to disappear, and then it crops up again somewhere else. And the interesting thing to me is if, as all sorts of people project at the moment, we're going to disappear in the next 50 or 60 years,
Yes.
Where's it going to come up from again?
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we touched before on the architecture of the pyramids. Why do you believe the pyramids were built? What was their main function?
Personally, as burial chambers, monuments.
That's what you believe.
Yeah.
It's a big building, isn't it, just for a burial chamber?
I would imagine, sort of trying to think back into the times, if you were Pharaoh, you had a fairly heavy ego and you would want to be remembered.
But there are pyramid structures, not just in Egypt, but around the world.
Oh, there are. There was something I saw recently where they were trying to make a relationship between a lot of the stuff that's being rediscovered in South America, where they have pyramid structures again.
Yes.
There are examples apparently in India I don't know whether they found anything any further east. I think it in a sense, it's a bit like the Tower of Babel in the Bible. It's trying to give a physical idea of this idea of reaching up, and trying to reach up.
A stairway to heaven.
Stairway to heaven, yes.
As in the song. Do you believe that the Aztecs built their pyramids as burial chambers?
I have no idea. It's an area I've not yet looked into.
A bit more studying on that part.
A bit more studying.
If you can tell us anything else about this room and the functions, if you can.
It's used for lodge meetings, and that will be anything from the 3 ceremonies by which you become a master mason, and then once a year each lodge, master of the lodge changes every year, and his officers who help him with the ceremonial during the year. So once a year they will hold the installation ceremony for the new master, and he will appoint his officers. And this actual room has, rather like the Grand Temple where we were earlier, has also been used. It was actually used in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And wonderful scene where John Malkovich is running down, apparently on metal legs, down a structure down the middle. But it's used on a almost daily basis during the Masonic season from September till June, because as well as being the national headquarters for English Freemasonry, we are also principal meeting place for lodges in London.
Okay.
So the main entrance hall from about 4 o'clock onwards is a bit like one of the mainline stations. People coming in and out to their meetings.
John, you've brought us to this wonderful area, which is the museum, and there seems to be things from all over the world. If you could just tell us a little bit about the collection.
We've been very lucky over the years. Members and members of the public have been very generous and donated stuff, and it's quite an amazing collection, because
it certainly is.
As well as the normal thing that like regalia and the medals that the Freemasons wear, it's part of what we were saying a little earlier about Freemasonry having been very public for most of its existence. And in the 18th century, from about the 1750s, enterprising glass and porcelain manufacturers and people who made domestic wares suddenly found they had a new market, and you get all sorts of things like glass and pots and things like warming pans for beds and fire grates and all sorts of things with Masonic decoration on them.
I can see that, actually. I mean, this piece is amazing, isn't it?
The punch bowl is fantastic. That came from...
That's a punch bowl.
It's
for alcohol.
And it was a lodge in India, meeting in Calcutta, and in 1813 they commissioned somebody in China to make that. It's Chinese porcelain, and put the Masonic decoration on it. And they had the most incredible recipe for punch, involving various spirits and soda and things like that, and a secret recipe of Indian herbs and spices.
So you haven't got it, you can't share it.
There is somebody still, because the lodge came back to this country in the 1970s, and there is somebody in the lodge that has the recipe.
Well, let me know when you have the party. Fill up the punch bowl. Great. What else can you show us around here?
We were talking earlier on about famous Freemasons, and here we've got Winston Churchill, who was the wartime Prime Minister, was a Freemason in the very early part. His apron and the little pouch he kept it in. And this is someone who I had the privilege of meeting. It was a Lieutenant Commander Tommy Gould, who was one of the Navy men who won a VC in the last war, and he was very involved in Freemasonry. His master mason's apron, and I think going on from the VC. I think one of the rather more emotional displays in the museum, an enormous amount of activity amongst prisoners of war from the wars against Napoleon in the late 18th century right the way through to the Second World War. And you've got examples of things here. These are officers' emblems, which they would have worn on their collars. They were made out of metal in one of the Japanese prisoner of war camps. And I remember talking to somebody who had been there, and I said, well, wasn't it dangerous? He said, oh yes, if we'd been caught doing anything, or caught with any of this on our person, we'd have been shot instantly. I said, well, why did you do it? And they said, well, it was the one way that we kept sane in the camp, and on it also happened on the Burma Railroad, and they said that kept us sane. Some people used to try to remember poetry, some people tried to remember the Bible. We used to practice our Masonic ritual, and that kept us going. And
what do you know about Masons being taken to the gas chambers when they were found out to be Masons during the war?
An enormous number disappeared. Nobody has an idea of the total, but every time that the Nazis moved into and took over a different country when the war started, the first thing they did was to round up a lot of Freemasons and seize their property. And we know
that wasn't just Jews; that was just Freemasons.
They were just Freemasons, and the Grand Master of the Grand-Lodge in Holland died in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and the only reason he was there was he had been the Grand Master. The French estimate something like 40,000 French Freemasons disappeared into labour camps and concentration camps, and were never seen again.
Why do you think that was?
Oh, it's Hitler had this idea of there being this sort of Jewish Masonic communist conspiracy.
Right.
To take over the world, and it wasn't just he. It was something that was happening in the late 19th, early 20th century, and during the First World War, this idea, crazy idea, grew up. I mean, communists don't like Freemasonry either. But
well, you've said before it's all about freedom of thought and expression, isn't it?
It is.
And anything where that's involved, that seems to be happening today again, doesn't it? Or
it is. It's
freedoms.
Somebody said to me recently, did I think Freemasonry was still relevant in the 21st century? And I said I think it's actually more relevant now than it has been since its earliest days, because society is getting very selfish. It's a sort of me society. We're getting more and more interference in what we do. A lot of our freedoms are being interfered with. And the whole basis of this idea of society and fraternalism, of tolerance and honesty and morality are very important.
Now, First and Second World Wars, people fought for their freedom, and Hitler did try to bring in, I don't know if he did bring in identity cards. I think he was on the verge of doing that. And that is exactly what is being done today. I mean, what do you think about that?
As an individual, I don't like it at all. But one of the things that, speaking as a Freemason, which I am doing at the moment, you'll find that Freemasonry as an organisation and individual Freemasons, we don't make comments on what is going on. It's all part of this business of no politics, no religion. We know that's dividing.
That, yes.
So that as an individual, I have my own
points
views.
of view.
But as a Freemason, I wouldn't express them. And it's like people often say, what does Freemasonry do for society? Freemasonry in itself and as an organisation doesn't do anything. It's the effect that Freemasonry and its principles and its rules have on the individual, and they carrying that out in their lives, then that obviously affects the way they react in society and in the community, and it has an effect through the individual. But Freemasonry, it's not a lobby group, it's not a political party. It doesn't give, as we say in our basic principle, it doesn't give an opinion on state or government policy.
Well, I suppose because you have so many people from different backgrounds,
that's exactly
it must be very difficult to meet on a common ground as such. But as you say, your principles are the same for freedom and justice.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
This is how the Master's Place would have been set up in the 18th century, where there was some wonderful 18th century furniture still survives. The Master's Chair.
That is a spectacular piece, isn't it?
It is. And again, you've got the two columns, and then in the sunburst at the top,
yes,
you've got the square, the set square, which is the master's emblem of office, which he would wear on his collar. The pedestal, you've got the Bible, or as we would call it, the volume of the sacred law, because that has to always be open, present and open at a meeting. But obviously, to a Hindu or a Parsi, it's not their sacred volume. So if a candidate came who was a Muslim, a Parsi or Hindu, they would use their holy book, which would also go on the pedestal. But as we are basically still a Christian country, the Bible would always stay there. And on it again you have the best known Masonic symbols, the square and the compasses, and the Master's light, and either side of the chair two rather splendid columns with again the terrestrial and the celestial globes, pointing out that Freemasonry is universal, and it's here the candidate would take his obligation as a Freemason, his serious promise to uphold the principles of Freemasonry, and would be instructed in the duties and principles by the Master. This is one of the more spectacular museum pieces. Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, one of the sons of King George III, was our Grand Master from 1813 till his death in 1843. And for his 25th anniversary, they decided to get up a subscription to give him a present. And Garrard's, the Crown Jewellers, made this. It's a table centerpiece for a dining table, quite a dozen size of a dining table.
It is, isn't it?
It's 2,002 ounces of pure silver. And again, you've got geometry, geography. You've got the idea of a temple, the pillars again, the sun on the top, and the pedestal with the Bible and the square and compasses on it.
It's absolutely incredible. Well, John, we just want to say thank you very much for taking us all around this, well, not all of the building, because I'm sure there's nooks and crannies that we can't explore, but we really want to thank you so much for all of your time today and showing us around this fabulous museum. And I do hope that we can come back in the future and add a little bit more to this programme that we've done, and I hope that you've enjoyed having us too.
It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope it might stimulate anybody who sees the programme to come in, because we are open to the public.
Yes, I mean, if you just want to say a few words about how people can come on the tours and have a look around here.
We're open Monday to Friday from 10 till 5, and provided the Grand Temple is not in use, we do tours at 11, 12, 2, 3 and 4 from the Library and Museum, and you simply turn up, register with the front desk and come up. If you want to come in and use the Library and Museum, they're open again. Saturdays we have an official conducted tour, which is always pre-arranged, but any other time, come in and see us and just have a wander around. And
yeah, so as I say, people don't realise that you can come in, but they can. But thank you so much for having us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. We've loved it. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
From the infamous Illuminati to the modern Freemasons, the world is fascinated with secret societies. Tales of child sacrifice, world domination, and dark dealings with extraterrestrials are all paraded before us as truth. The New World Order, famously penned by the science fiction writer H.G. Wells, has become a reality in the minds of millions, and today its leaders are even believed by some to be reptilian shapeshifters. The massive amounts of information set before us now on the World Wide Web may be spreading further and faster than ever before, but the belief in a powerful and secret ruling elite is nothing new. In fact, secret societies have been around almost as long as man. The eventual knowledge of these groups would be deemed sacred and protected. Whether it was practical methods of survival, navigation, measurement, or psychological and spiritual inner wisdom, it would become the ground plan for future secret societies, and as populations grew, it would bestow great power and danger upon them. It all began in the knowledge of the heavens and the mind of man. It all revolved around strength, and so our question has to be today: what is the true purpose of the modern elite within the Brotherhood? Is it truly one of charitable works? Yes. Does it still maintain ideas about reaching the divine in balance and wisdom? Yes. Is it an organisation seeking influence and power? Yes. Has it been involved with revolution and scandal? Yes. This is the story of the groups who have guarded this sacred knowledge for centuries.
The Green Party is so attached to its global warming and it's terrible and must do something about its greenhouse gases and its pollution, that they don't want to hear that that's not happening. Because their reason for being is being challenged. The very reason that they sell themselves and they get their backing and support, they have to protect that.
Mars and the other planets are also warming up. Are they driving a lot of trucks on Mars? Well, I don't see. There are 2 rovers now on Mars. Well, okay, there is climate change.
What we're seeing today in terms of global warming and climate change and all the rest of it that goes with that, I do not believe is being caused by mankind and the emissions from our cars and factories and so on. It's the sun. And the sun itself is being driven by cosmic forces as well. That we live within a universe of change, and it's foolish of us to think otherwise.
A lot of the cycles, and people are talking about the sun entering a new place of the galaxy, a new part of the galaxy that we haven't been around for hundreds of millions of years. There are lots of unknowns on an astrophysics level. None of these scientists know exactly what drives the cycles of the sun.
Nobody knows the theory that the Maya knew. No scientist today knows the theory about the sunspot cycle. It took me many years to find and to decode this theory. If there is one solar flare 2.5 times bigger than the one from 1989 that destroyed the electric grid system in Canada, then the whole worldwide grid system will be completely shut down.
In studies of geomagnetic reversals in the laboratory, they found that it would occur when the geomagnetic field weakens and reduces, and you would also get areas of inverted field breaking out in sort of odd areas. And both of those things have now come to pass.
I can tell you as a former Earth scientist is that we are seeing measurable parameters that are changing and appear to be converging. For example, the magnetic fields of the Earth are in rapid decline right now. They reached a peak about 2,000 years ago. They have declined consistently, never looked back since then. We are now at the lowest magnetic point in global magnetics that we've been the last 2,000 years.
Now that those who sit in higher positions of power and influence, they know all this. I have absolutely no doubt that they know about this.
Whether it's disaster, or nirvana, depends on, where you are. If it could be nirvana if you're, some poor guy, trying to scratch a living in the dust bowls of Africa, or it could be disaster if you happen to be one of the ruling classes who control everyone.
Unless we have a radical change of consciousness, that's the future that very large numbers of people seem to be okay with. And that's what I find scary, is a future with no soul.
In our modern times, fantasy is commonplace and a means of escape for many. But in times past, people had to rely on religious fables and oral tales. But then a group of writers started to bring us new worlds and set our imaginations on fire. One of these was Lewis Carroll. Strange and peculiar lands, mind-bending conundrums, weird creatures. Was this all nonsense? Or is there a real and profound enigma locked away in the tales of Alice? It's time to unlock the door and peer into a realm of fantasy that holds a message for us all. Was Lewis Carroll initiated into the ancient mysteries? What were his connections to secret societies? Why were his diaries destroyed? What did he hide in the pages of his Alice books? There is a whole world of incredible truth locked away in the works of Lewis Carroll. There is also a good reason that Alice is Greek for truth.
going beyond the ancient Egyptian civilization. And everything is changing now because the evidence is coming out strong, hard, solid, stone evidence. And in a place where we didn't expect it at all, where I wasn't looking at all. The centerpiece of this is a stone circle. We call it the sort of Stonehenge of the desert. You know, we're realizing that there was a prehistoric culture all over the place. Megalithic prehistoric culture. They were integrated with the machinery of the cycles of nature. They survived for 3,000 years until we brought our own man-made religion, which didn't make sense at all, and look what happened to Egypt, you know? We're bankrupt compared to these people who are spending thousands of years studying and looking and trying to make sense of it from a spiritual point of view. This is what is wrong. And we need to realize that we are creatures that are essentially spiritual. You know, I don't care what scientists want to say. You know, if you're uncomfortable with that, well, that's too bad, because that's what we are. And we need to wake up again.
Sometime between the years 1110 and 1120, the Knights Templar found a great secret hidden under the Temple Mound in Sion, Jerusalem, and indeed became the custodians of this find, guarding it from the outside world ever since.
Lincoln conceals its own lost Arcadia. It has always been said that the Holy Grail resided in England. Our quest has developed into a Lincoln Cathedral code. What is the secret that they never wanted to be revealed? A bloodline was terminated. What is the secret that they never wanted to be revealed? A bloodline was terminated.
In the 11th century, the Christian world was sent into a frenzy of religious bigotry and hatred towards all those who did not believe in Jesus Christ as the Saviour of mankind. all the sins of your life and those of your ancestors would be forgiven if you took the cross and marched with your brethren into the promised land. Ours is not a tale that will continue that propaganda. This is a work that will investigate the order, warts and all, and reveal a startling conclusion that is simply ignored by most historians.
There is a darkness upon the land. It is a time of oppression. The people are under a new rule. The Normans have come. They have brought with them a new way of life, a new language, and the old ways are being lost in the mists of time. But some tales have survived. The people remember. A great hero comes to them from the dark woods. He is the Hooded Man. His legend has lived on to this very day. His memory still shines bright like the May Day sun. If only we could remember why.
Rosslyn Chapel was built upon an area that was a noted place of healing from the word go. I can tell you that when I first went there in the early 1990s, that the impression that I had when I walked through the door was of immense latent power. It's a nexus of earth energy, and as I have found out through hard experimentation, there is an operable portal between this world and the next inside that chapel. It wasn't just another building, it was a powerhouse of spirit, it was a powerful place. And I think the chapel was built in such proportions that it would take and harmonise that energy. I think it would amplify. It was acting almost as an amplifier, a stone-built amplifier. The chapel is actually moving in time, not in this time, but 0.1% in another time. I was asked, would I like to experience this energy? I literally came off the floor. It wasn't feet off the floor, maybe half an inch. I actually lifted from the floor, fell forward. I was absolutely amazed, I was completely astounded. I hadn't a clue what had happened. So you could see the faces on the other side. They wanted to be brought through to this side of reality. The purpose of the augmented fourth was to induce a feeling of uneasiness or instability in the listener, and, if you like, introduce the devil into music. That the augmented fourth was inducing some of them to experience altered states of consciousness. Why would Sir William go to all the trouble of introducing this devil's chord?
Elementary, my dear Watson.
Gaslights, horse-drawn carriages, a fog enshrouded London. Great wealth and squalor exist side by side. Queen Victoria presides over a mighty global empire. It is the greatest period of global expansion in the history of Great Britain. Yet in spite of this, psychopaths like Jack the Ripper stalk the streets, and poverty and crime are endemic. The public needed a diversion, a hero, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle unwittingly granted their wish when he created what is perhaps the greatest fictional sleuth of all time, the peerless gentleman detective, Sherlock Holmes.
This gentleman is Mr. Sherlock Holmes. How do you do?
I was studying the faces of my fellow passengers. Fascinating hobby, and sometimes most enlightening.
Doyle wove his literary magic, and his fictional characters took on a life of their own. Their exploits have been told and retold hundreds of times in print, and as technology progressed, in the cinema, radio and television. The tales were so effective that thousands of people the world over came to believe that Holmes and his faithful assistant were no work of fiction and actually lived at 221B Baker Street. So much so that letters to Holmes still arrive by the hundred at this address. The world of Sherlock Holmes was one of continual change and hope, yet simultaneously filled with threats of fear, drudgery, disease and hunger. Did these insidious influences affect Doyle when he peopled his imaginary world with its larger-than-life characters? His creation, Holmes, has become better known than his creator. But what of his friend and right-hand man, the enigmatic Dr. Watson? Why did Conan Doyle think his ultra-efficient amateur sleuth would need an assistant? What was the reality behind this rather unassuming and neglected man? Who was he? Where did he come from? And why was he so vital to the way in which Holmes operated?
Madam, I'm a graduate of the Royal College of Physicians. I specialize in human beings.